We all have that task, that one thing on our to-do list that we never seem to get around to, even though we know that taking action on that thing would probably really improve our lives or our business. Here's the thing, that hesitation is completely natural. Logically, we may understand the benefits of taking action, but beneath the surface, our brains often prefer the comfort of the status quo, even if it doesn't actually feel that comfortable. Taking any kind of action just feels too risky to our very risk-averse brain. This is understandable when it comes to a biological imperative to survive. If you know there's a saber-toothed tiger wandering around the village, staying hidden is probably a really good idea. But when it comes down to running our business in the modern world, it may not be such a great choice to stay and hide. Often the result of not taking action is actually worse than anything that might happen as a result of taking that action. But we find ourselves ignoring that reality and coming up with various stories, narratives, and excuses about why we're not taking that action that at one level we know is the right thing to do. Let's take a closer look at 5 very common stories we tell ourselves. See if you recognize yourself in any of them. I'm Rachel Roberts and I'm a long-term ELT freelancer, now business and mindset coach to other ELT and ESL freelance professionals. I can help you earn more, work less, and live more fully. Story number 1. It's not the right time to do this or to make a change. Sure, timing is absolutely a factor to consider. If you're already completely overwhelmed, then forcing yourself to do something in a way that means that you're working all the hours is not necessarily the right way to go. However, if it's never actually the right time to do this thing, then there may be something else at play. The truth is that there is almost never a perfect time to do something. Other things will always get in the way if you let them. So we need to embrace the idea that probably this time is as good as any other time, and we just need to get on with it. If you've been putting off starting something, launching a new course, or starting to market yourself because you're waiting for the ideal moment, take this as a sign to start now. Starting now, even if it's not perfect, is often the best path forward. As you go along, you'll learn more and you'll improve. Story number 2. Yes, I'm going to do this thing. I just need to, whatever it is, first. This story is about convincing ourselves that before we can do the thing, we need to acquire new skills or learn something. I find that this is particularly prevalent amongst educators, and I include myself in this sometimes, because of course there is absolutely value in learning and in knowing what you're talking about. However, very often this can become a kind of excuse. Sometimes the best way to learn something is to learn it as you go along, to learn it on the job. You don't have to know everything or to be perfect to start something. And what is perfect anyway? You'll probably never reach a point where you think that your knowledge or your expertise is perfect. Just start and get better as you go along. Let's say that you want to incorporate more online tools into your teaching, for example, but somehow you never seem to get around to it because you don't have the time to learn how to use these tools perfectly. Set aside a relatively small amount of time to familiarize yourself with just one tool. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Then try it out in class. Yes, you might hit a few little bumps along the way, but you're going to learn much more quickly that way. And your students will simply appreciate that you are trying to give them the best service that you can. After all, aren't we always telling our students not to get hung up on making mistakes? Story number 3. It won't make any difference. Obviously, if doing something isn't actually going to have any positive impact, then there's not much point in devoting time and energy to doing it. However, when we tell ourselves this story, usually we have no evidence that it isn't going to make a difference. And in fact, we may have plenty of evidence that it probably is going to make a difference. Of course, there are rarely any guarantees, but just trying something properly is always better than staying stuck and not moving forward. Best case scenario, it turns out to be a brilliant thing for us and our business. Worst case scenario, we will have learnt plenty along the way, and that will help us know what is the right next step for us to take. What have you learned from trying something new recently? Let us know in the comments. Story number 4. I don't know where to start. Feeling overwhelmed and not sure where to start is a really common story. The part of us that is worried or fearful, the inner troll as I sometimes call it, has a tendency to paint a picture of this enormous mountain or barrier that lies in our way, as a way of kind of trying to put us off from taking any action that it might consider at all risky. The answer is actually quite simple. We need to stop focusing on the top of the mountain. We may even change our mind about which mountain we're climbing along the way anyway, and instead just focus on the next few steps. Set a clear goal, break it down into manageable, bite-sized, digestible bits, and focus on taking that first action, and then the next one, and then the next one. And before you know it, you'll be at least halfway up the mountain. As you progress forward, the path will become clearer, and you'll also gain more confidence and motivation as you go. And the last story, it's not working. Human beings are hardwired to notice the negative more than the positive. It's biologically there to help protect us again. But this means that we tend to have a natural inclination to focus on anything that we feel is not working or any criticism that we perceive before we notice the things that actually are working or the nice feedback that we may be getting from people. And this can often lead to us giving up just that bit too soon. I spoke to a client yesterday who talked about a tendency that they have to complete 90% of a project and then not the final 10%. If that sounds at all familiar to you, it is often because there is actually that fear that we might actually succeed. And sometimes that's more worrying than failing. Success is very rarely a linear journey. There are going to be setbacks along the way, but we have to make sure that we consciously notice every time something actually does go well, because we can learn from that just as well as we can learn from the things that didn't go so well. However, this doesn't mean that you should persist indefinitely if something is clearly not working and you have some evidence for that. You need to be open to pivoting or to trying a new approach, but only after you've given something a really good go and analyze the results objectively. For example, imagine that you've upped your prices for your teaching offer, and after a few months, you find that perhaps you're taking on fewer students. Now, you might immediately assume that this is because you upped your prices, but before you make a change, go back and look at all the data you have, because perhaps it's happened because you haven't been marketing your business as much. It's really important to look at all the data you have objectively before you decide too quickly that something isn't working. So, did you recognize yourself in any of those 5 stories? If you did, that's perfectly natural and normal, but it's not necessarily very helpful when it comes to moving ahead in your business or your life. Recognizing these narratives is absolutely the first and most important step in breaking free from them. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just notice what's happening and question it. Is this really something that I need to believe and follow, or is it the inner troll piping up and trying to keep me safe? Let me know in the comments which of these stories you recognise and what steps you're going to take now to overcome them. In the next video coming up on your screen, I'm going to talk about what I believe is probably the biggest issue impacting your income. Watch to find out what it is and how to overcome it. And don't forget to subscribe.